the summer of 1997, I was 9 and scared of my own shadow, so this experience only furthered my fear of the world. My mom and I drove up from Revere to Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire to camp. My dad was going to drive up the next morning to meet us because he had work. So, everything was going normal at the campsite. We set up the tent, built our fire, and all was well. It was still daylight when we noticed that the lone, greasy-haired man in the campsite connected to ours was continually running and leaping onto a wooden post, then attempting to balance himself on one foot. He kept doing this over and over again. It was odd, but we just figured he was some lonely kook and had a good laugh at his expense. My mom thought maybe he was trying out for the circus. So, cut to nighttime. Absolute darkness if not for the campfire. My mom and I were sitting and roasting s'mores over the flames when we suddenly heard footsteps approaching from the other campsite. Out of the pines, the lone man stumbled onto our campsite and he was ghastly and ragged in the firelight. I could tell my mom was tense. She asked the stranger what he needed. "Hey," he mumbled, "I need your help in my campsite." We waited, and he didn't go on. My mom asked what he needed help with. The filthy man said, "I locked my keys in my van. I need you to come over and help me." He then looked at me and said, "Don't worry, kid. You can stay here with your fire." I remember getting goosebumps at that. My mom said, "I don't know how I can help you with your keys." "You must have a spare hanger lying somewhere around." My mom told him she didn't. The ghoulish man wouldn't let up though. "Yeah, you must have a hanger lying around here somewhere. Maybe you dropped one on the ground near your tent." My mom adamantly told him she didn't have a hanger and quickly added, "My husband will be here soon. Maybe he can help you. He's a pretty strong guy." "Yeah, all right." The creep slurred and he started to trudge away into the dark, but that's when he turned his head and said, "If you do find a hanger, come help me. I'll be here." And with that, the horrible man left. My mom and I barely slept that night. I felt her moving at every sound outside of the tent. Looking back, my poor mother must have stayed up through the long night, worrying a butcher knife was going to slash through the tent wall. And so with that, morning eventually came, and when we stepped out of the tent, we immediately saw that the lone man and his camper van were gone. Later in the day, I heard my mom exclaim. I immediately ran over to her and watched as she picked something up from the ground beside her tent. She held it between us, staring at it and not speaking. It was a metal hanger. I also found out later in life that 4 dead females were found stuffed into metal barrels in Bear Brook State Park back in the 80s. I really don't remember all the details. I may have some things mixed up, but there is a wiki page in the description below. My mom owns her own business and works extremely hard. This means she spends many late nights sitting on the living room floor with her work sprawled out around her. One night back in 2003, she had her typical routine going, sorting through paperwork and making piles. It was late, close to midnight on a Wednesday, so when the phone rang, she was a bit surprised. My dad worked 3rd shift at a factory, so she assumed it was him. When she answered the phone, there was no reply, just lots of heavy breathing. She was extremely creeped out. She hung up and called my dad. He told her he hadn't called her, and she left it at that. Keep in mind, this was almost 15 years ago, and we lived in a small town with practically no crime. We never locked our doors, and were never scared of dangerous people, but the phone calls kept coming, every night, multiple times a night. And then the person on the other end started talking. He started by saying, "Hello, Diane," "You're so beautiful. I'd love to meet you." And things escalated into him going into graphic detail of how he wanted to rape and strangle her. Of course, she stopped answering the phone, but she informed the police. Nothing was ever done, and the phone would continue to ring. My parents weren't in a situation where my dad could stay home from work, and my mom truly believed the calls were just empty threats, so things continued on. That was until one night he got brave. My mom was sitting on the floor in front of our huge mirror cabinet with all of her work around her when the phone rang. She ignored it as usual. She was concentrating hard on a piece of paper in front of her when a glimmer of light in the mirror caught her eye. She looked up to see a pair of eyeglasses peering at her in the reflection. She spun around to face the front door, which her back had been turned to, and a man was standing there staring at her. She said they both just stared at each other for what felt like forever, until she saw the doorknob turn. She started screaming, and the man quickly ran away. In light of the phone calls, my parents had started locking all of the doors, which was a total foreign concept to our household. My older brother, who was about 17 at the time and was aware of the phone calls, came running down the stairs with a baseball bat, but the man was long gone. When the police came, they scoured our property and came across close to 200 cigarette butts right underneath our living room windows. He had been watching her for weeks. The police also happened to find a bike tire trail coming from the windows and going down the sidewalk. They took the cigarette butts and did DNA testing on them and were able to match them to a convicted rapist who lived down the street from us. Robert Ham was arrested while riding his bike. He went to prison for menacing an attempt to commit a crime. He had many priors, so we assumed he would be locked up for quite some time. The reason I'm telling you this story is because he was released from prison earlier this year. In the summer of 2004, my family was supposed to vacation in Kembunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mom wanted to drive up, which was super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't have a choice, and my brother, sister, and I loaded into the car and started the drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was pretty uneventful, but there were various delays and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. This sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mom was completely unfazed and decided she wanted lobster, so we went out to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us reservations at a hotel from New York City while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mom and my mom excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently all the hotels were booked for the night. Go figure, height of vacation season in Kembunkport. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently the local had been listening into my mom's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I just want to say, there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was preppy, clean cut, unassuming, and fit in with the clientele. He told my mom he had a big home with a big guest house, and we were more than welcome to stay, and his wife wouldn't mind. Immediately my reaction was F that. No way in the world was I staying in a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. No offense to anyone from Maine, but the streets do get creepy. My mom, doing her due diligence, determined this guy was legit. He said he was in finance. My mom was an investment banker, and they talked long enough for my mom to determine that he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister, and I got into the car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle of the room, they were right under the window in each room, and it just seemed out of place. Anyway, we're all getting ready to go to bed. My mom hears a knock on the door, and it's the guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got settled. Cool, that was a pretty nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, "Thanks, we're good. We'll stop by the house in the morning to say thank you, etc." I can't sleep, and I'm feeling absolutely terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere near trees or close proximity to the bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mom wide awake and look up at the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up, there was a male figure just standing there. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. When he walked away, my mom waited a bit and then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear what it was about. My mom said she was going to put the stuff in the car and to follow her out. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return the key and say thanks and get the fuck out of there. However, when we got to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table lamp in the front windows, everything was black. Also, the 2 cars were gone. The local's car, and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom at this point, pretty unsettled, said we were leaving, and we proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted and padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev it. We were in a big SUV, and we just got out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We have never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I asked a family member one night about it when he was drunk, and all he said was, "They didn't tell you?" The actual owners of that house were on vacation. I'm assuming my mom or dad followed up with the local authorities and figured that out, but they never told us. I don't know who that man was or what was planned that evening. This is a precautionary tale. I understand that this was my fault, but maybe if I can help one person by telling my story, it's worth it. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city, and they left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay. I went back to his place, post-coitus, very unsatisfying for anyone interested. I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I really don't know where I am. I know I'm in the city, but not my exact location. I order the Uber, but it's taking forever, and I immediately request, so I cancel and try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like, "Is this the Uber?" and I hop in. That was a mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting. I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're heading on the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive. and we're going a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there, and I'm not. The reason for that? I'm in the car with a fucking nutcase. I start texting my friend frantically, counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's going to do jack, because she's probably drunk too. So I call 911, but I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car. So I've got to do it on the sly. It's been about 40 minutes now, and I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this is. We're driving at over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. This guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone. Yo, get off the phone. Who the fuck are you calling? Better not be a snitch. And also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher, as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on. Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past the highway exit. No, sweetie, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends. Thanks, sweet baby Jesus. The operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends the police, and we develop a code. If I see the police, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out of the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex, and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code. Oh girl, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out the coke. You would love it. He's taking a really big bump. You know, that sort of thing. Pretty soon I could see the lights from the police cars, so I start waving my hand out of the window. At this point I don't care if he's on to me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, so I slump down in my seat just in case things get hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then once it's safe, they get me out as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all of this to the officer, I find out that of the guy's 40-ish years on Earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them for violent offenses. I want people to learn from my mistakes, and if nothing else, call 911 and stay on the line. This incident happened back in 2014 when I was last committed to a psych ward for a suicide attempt. A little background. I'm a female and was 19 at the time. I was coming off of 3 years of bipolar medication while at a peak of substance abuse felicitated by my first year in college, going crazy with the new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental episode and was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care other than to prescribe and get you out. I was led to the room I was staying in, and the nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," and left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s, early 50s, and just a little taller than me. She would not keep her gaze off of the floor in front of her, and didn't say a word or move when I said hi. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil. I figured I'd just leave her alone and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in the psych ward, with a nightly group, and my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor, barely moving an inch. While everyone was lining up to be given their medications before bed, the ward across began to start banging on the glass of the door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against the glass window, while the guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. It seemed as if they were almost going to break through, but the orderlies came and took them away with their screams still lingering through the walls. Being in a psych ward before, I wasn't surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior like yelling or fights starting, but this was completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illness deteriorating their mind, not little angry kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head, but even these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try to get any rest that night. You know the feeling of being awake but haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment where you're barely waking up and everything is fuzzy? This is the state of consciousness I was in later that night. I felt like I was waking up, but as if something was waking me up, yet still tired so I wasn't opening my eyes. The more I came to, I felt pressure on my forehead and I could sense sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes to find the roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eyes with one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled-up fist on her chest, while she speaks in what I assumed is tongues. I look into her eyes, and they are blank and empty of any emotion. She keeps speaking faster and getting louder. I'm paralyzed at this point, not sure what to do or what she would even do if I were to yell or move. It was only us in the room, and the nurse's station is all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead while still speaking fast and erratic, and I wasn't sure what she was doing or planned on doing next. She then put both hands on my forehead and at this point was screaming while shaking me, but not long before a nurse came in and took her off of me. The nurse seemed more irritated that she had to get up and do her job. She escorted the woman out and said don't worry and just go back to sleep. I really don't know how I managed to fall back asleep. I assumed she got transferred to the more severe ward because I did not see her the next day, and luckily, I was able to leave later that day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being, because while I have issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my life to experience this again, or something far worse.